let's talk about tariffs. And let's say we gave Donald Trump a magic wand where basically all trade deficits could be erased from the US. So that would mean that they would be trading still with all different countries, but the amount of imports and the amount of exports would be the same everywhere. So they would have the equal trade with Canada, equal trade with Mexico, so forth. And let's imagine that there is this brilliant, smart, entrepreneurial guy. We'll call him Elon. And Elon's got this idea in his head. He's like, you know what? If we could import lithium and cobalt into the US, then we could make these batteries and electric cars. We'd build factories. We would employ lots of people, and we would make a ton of money selling these cars in the United States and everywhere in the world. Now, here comes the government. Well, Elon, I know that's a terrific idea and all, and yeah, you'd make loads of money and you'd employ lots of people. But sorry, we are already importing too many things. We can't have a trade deficit. Otherwise, we'd be subsidizing the world. Sorry. So does that sound like a productive way to grow an economy? The whole idea of a trade deficit being a subsidy makes no sense. When America buys something from, let's say, Canada or Mexico, they give money, but they receive a product in return. That's not a subsidy. That's a sale. And in many cases, those products are not just ready for consumers, but they're actually raw materials and components that are actually used by US companies to create higher value products, just like Elon wants to do. But what about tariffs? Some people think that tariffs protect jobs. Now, is that true? Let's just test that idea for a second. Let's say we've got two companies, one in the United States and one in Canada, and both make phalanges.
Something is wrong with the left phalange.
There was something wrong with the left phalange.
Both companies sells their phalanges for $100 each. Then the US, because it wants to protect the US companies, slaps a 25% tariff on the Canadian phalange company. So now Canadian phalanges are costing $125 to the American consumers, while the American phalanges are still at $100. Now, at first, this seems like a win for the American phalange company. But here's the problem. For years, the American phalange company had to compete with its Canadian counterpart, which forced them to be efficient. That means cutting waste, improving quality, and keeping prices low. Now, with a $25 buffer, the American company realizes it doesn't need to work as hard to stay competitive. They can raise prices up to $110, $120 and still be cheaper than the tariffed Canadian alternative. Instead of investing in innovation, they rely on protection. Instead of finding ways to be the best, they just get hooked on tariffs. Now, you may be thinking, that sounds like a wonderful imaginary use case, but what about the reality? Well, this isn't just theory. This actually happens. Go back to the 1980s when the United States were looking at protecting the American steel industry. Back then, American steel companies were facing massive competition from its Japanese counterparts. The Japanese were producing high quality steel at a lower price. So the US government stepped in and slapped massive tariffs on Japanese steel, thinking this is going to protect American jobs in the steel industry. At first, this seemed to work. US steelmakers got some breathing room, but what did the Japanese do? They got even more competitive. Rather than backing off, the Japanese doubled down on innovation. They improved production techniques, invested in more efficient factories. They also adjusted their pricing strategy to maintain their edge despite the tariffs. The result, by the 1990s, the Japanese high-quality steel was again flooding the markets. American companies were still struggling because they were relying on government protection rather than improving their own competitiveness. Japanese steel grew even stronger, while US manufacturers were left scrambling to keep up. Now, here's the thing. Tariffs are kind of like fentanyl. They give you a huge temporary high that leads to long-term pain. At first, tariffs feel great. Jobs are saved, businesses look profitable, but just like fentanyl, they don't fix the underlying problem. They just numb the pain temporarily and form a dangerous but deadly addiction. Over time, industries become weaker. Without competition, they stop innovating. Prices go up. Tariffs often cause inflation. other countries retaliate with their own tariffs. But isn't the objective here is to restore the American manufacturing base and enabling America to export to other countries? Instead of opening up new markets for American goods, tariffs close doors and make it harder for US companies to compete in the global economy. Eventually, businesses become dependent on tariffs, just like an addict needs a fix. And when the government tries to take them away, withdrawal hits hard. Factories that weren't prepared to compete start collapsing. The strongest industries aren't the ones protected by tariffs. They're the ones that can compete and win on their own. Tariffs are a crutch, an economic drug that feels good in the short term, but weakens the economy in the long run. So the question is, do we want to get hooked on temporary relief, or do we want real, lasting economic strength? Choice is clear. Let's stop using tariffs like an economic opioid and build real, lasting growth.